On Tuesday 22nd of June 1897, Carlton played its first match at Princes Park. This first outing ended in defeat at the hands of Collingwood, but 108 years, 962 matches and 673 wins later, Princes Park was revered by friend and foe.
As a stadium, it seemed to move, like it seemed to be very much a living thing, particularly the social end, if Carlton were kicking that end in the last quarter. Like the stadium seemed to breathe and to move, and you just got a real sort of sense of what you were as a club.
We'd enter at gate 2, you'd come down a foil parade, and obviously people would get the number 19 tram, and you'd walk into the ground and you'd stand where you stood every week, and every week around you were the same people. And I remember there was this gentleman with a young family, and his kids are probably 20 odd now, and they were always sitting in the same spot. And everything about it was, it was just, if you're going to the game at Princes Park, this is what you do.
We knew we'd come here and it was our fortress and look out, you know, and the noise and everything was fabulous, you know, and it was, oh good, you know, we're going to kick home in the last quarter, which everybody wanted to do, because we knew we'd lift no matter where we were, and it was terrific to watch.
It gave me a lovely bond with my father, because it was the time of the week where it was just my dad and I, and would come and sit in the Healy stand and watch the game, and would get here early and watch the twos and talk about the game afterwards, and it was special with my old man.
The experiences I had here were just fantastic. I saw great marks, great goals. I was near where Buzz took that mark over Geelong. I saw great games here, and it was so simple. You know, Dad went in one gate, I went as a guest in the other, stood in the same position with my mates. Their fathers were up there watching the game, and it was sensational.
In 1947, Bert Deacon became Carlton's first ever Brownlow medalist. Far from the gala-style event that it is today, Bert and his wife Jean listened to the ceremony on the wireless from the comfort of their home in Preston. Deacon represented Carlton in 106 senior matches, including the 1945 and 1947 premierships. In 1877, its first year in the VFA, Carlton was adjudged Premier of the competition, finishing the 21-match season with 14 wins, 4 draws and only 3 losses. 1877 ranks as one of Carlton's greatest years. John Gardner captained his club to premiership honours, and George Coulthard was named Champion of the Colony, the second of 3 he would secure in a magnificent playing career. On Saturday 24th of September 1938, in front of more than 96,000 at the MCG, Carlton, led by former South Melbourne champion Brighton Diggins as captain coach, broke a 23-year premiership drought and took home the 1938 flag with a 15-point victory over Collingwood. The grand final win was made even more significant because it was the last game of Harry "Soapy" Vallance. Vallance had played 204 games and kicked an incredible 722 goals for the Blues in a stellar career. In 1902, Carlton appointed Jack Worrell as club secretary. The former Fitzroy player and Test cricketer led the Blues in 144 matches for 100 wins. Through his innovations in training and game day tactics, he pioneered the role that we now know as senior coach and led Carlton to become the first team in the VFL to win 3 consecutive grand finals in 1906, 07 and 08. On Saturday, September 22, 1906, Carlton defeated Fitzroy by 49 points to win its first VFL premiership. A then record crowd of 44,437 gathered at the MCG to watch Fitzroy's former clubman, Jack Worrell, steer the Blues to a classy victory over his old side. Newspapers reported that pubs in Carlton dispensed free beer that afternoon. On September 26 in 1908, the Carlton Football Club made league history when it became the first VFL club to win 3 premierships in a row. The match, witnessed by over 50,000 spectators at the MCG, saw the Blues beat arch-rivals Essendon by 9 points in windy conditions. Recognising the extraordinary influence of coach Jack Worrell, the team became known as Jack's Heroes.
Well, my dad came here as a migrant when he was 11 years old. He was a young boy, lived near Princes Park, came to the football and fell in love with the game. So there was no argument at home. I was the only boy. I barracked for Carlton. Luckily, my sister barracks for Carlton, my nieces, nephews, they all barracked for Carlton, plus my daughter or daughters. So, you know, we're just Carlton. And that legacy, through success, has lived on. Very interesting because we just won the premiership in '68 and unfortunately I couldn't get a ticket. So I remember listening to the game, you know, going through, and we beat Essendon by 3 points. So first home game, we're going to unfurl the flag, we're not going to be missed. So the whole group of us go there and we stand from the old press box on the out and we see the flag being unfurled and, you know, we're on top of it. And it was an amazing game, good day, and the goals just seemed to be coming. Interesting, Hawthorn went bad. They kicked, I think, 12 goals in that game, which is not a bad score, but everybody was kicking them. Everybody, Wolsey, Jezza, Peter Jones, they were just kicking them. And, you know, and we were on a roll. And naturally, the fences weren't what they are today. So it was open football. I think we might have even kicked 12 goals in the last quarter, you know, and it just kept coming. And it was a fantastic atmosphere. Great thing about Princes Park was the atmosphere. You know, you could only have 25, 30,000, but the place was rocking. For me, it's a bit of my upbringing and family. You know, our family is Carlton. I go to the foot with a guy I've been going for 20 years, another Italian guy. It's there. And you go past and you go in a place like this and you think of memories, you think of games, you think of your father, you think of my daughter, I brought them to the football, one of them to the football. You think of all that and you know that nothing will change, it'll always be Carlton. Whether we're good or bad, it'll always be Carlton. And we matter, and in the football terms, we matter a lot.
Well, I first came here, we lived in Brunswick, and my father was a mad Carlton supporter, and he used to bring me up when I was about 8 or 9, and we'd go through the turnstiles, and he had a ticket, and used to shove me in front and away we'd go, see. But that's when I first started, and I really got into it in about 1930. Well, I remember it was a pretty warm day, and we couldn't, I was with my father, and we couldn't get tickets. So we got standing room tickets, and I was under the stand where they had a kind of a wall, and if you got there first, you got a good view. And the game was, well, Essendon threw it away actually, because They had it up there, but they just couldn't get it through, whereas Carlton kicked something like 4 goals straight in the first quarter, and I think they had 8 goals straight in the second quarter. It was a fairly good game. They had good men like Essendon had very good players, Brittingham, Hutchison, Dickie Reynolds, quite a few of them, you know. And Carlton had quite a few good players too. Bertie Deacon, Ern Henfrey, Chuka Howell. I think it was a throw-in from the boundary, and Kenny Baxter, I think he was a reserve then, he must have come on. And he somehow got it out to Stafford, and Stafford off it went bang through the goal. And of course the Carlton supporters went mad because practically straight after the siren or the bell sounded, you know. It was a marvellous game, but like you would have said 5 minutes before the end, well, you know, it was gone. So it was very exciting, yeah. I think it means everything to me, you know. I actually filled in a couple of times selling records outside the ground. It was a blue record and so forth. But I've always been a mad Carlton supporter all the time, you know, and I got a great thrill out of it, and they've been pretty good with 16 premierships, so, you know.
My grandfather was a Collingwood supporter and bid fairly hard for me to be a Collingwood supporter. I was the sort of first grandchild that took a real interest in football and sport. So, but it didn't quite click, and I don't know whether it was lack of success in premiership terms that sort of never sort of got me over the line. But I had an uncle, my grandmother's brother, who lived in Melbourne. So Melbourne to us was all about, his name was Jim Fitz. And you would walk into his house and he'd have the frame photo of Jezza, and it just had that mythical sort of feel about it. And you know, so I started following, and then by the time 79 rolled around, I was very much a Carlton supporter, and then from 79 you pretty much lock it in. Once you hit Royal Parade, you sort of do feel as if you've crossed some sort of border, and you're very much in Carlton sort of territory, and you just see these flock of people, 90% of whom are wearing navy, and you sort of park the car, get out and walk along Royal Parade, and this stage the leaves have all turned, and then you get in, you had the reserves game beforehand, so you were straight into it, you sort of just felt a part of it straight away. And I remember just getting a good spot right on the fence, sort of in and around the 50-metre mark at the, I guess you would call it the Carlton end, as opposed to the social club end, and just sort of settled in. I remember really anticipating it being West Coast, and I think that was either the start or the middle of that incredible run we had at Princes Park, where we won pretty much every time we played there. I remember that it was Silvani had the ball in the back line, sort of kicked it out to a contest, and Bradley created the contest, sort of turned his opponent around a little bit, got the ball and just ran. And then he dished off to Andrew McKay, got the 1-2, got it straight back, and just kept running along the boundary. And then it was either just outside 50 or just inside, sort of just took one step in, banana kick, and sort of went through. And you talk about the stadium sort of being a physical being, like everyone just rose at the same time, and it was just, and I was a year out, but that was the moment where I said, we're going to win it. We're going to win the whole thing this year. I was just a year out, but no, so it was, and it sort of stuck with us. Like it is a real sort of touching point for my brother and I when we do talk about old Carlton games. We were, if not on the fence, then one back from the fence, right in front of where he kicked it. So we were sort of right on the 50-metre line. So that's why I sort of can't remember whether he was in front or slightly behind, and it's kind of irrelevant. in a way, because the goal is the run, the dish off, getting it back, and the banana kick sort of just getting through. So we were, and when I watch it on YouTube, I just keep trying and pause it, but the quality is not so great as to be able to have that frame where I'm sort of there watching as he kicks that goal. The football ground, going down to Lygon Street on a Saturday night after the game, sort of really shaped my frame of reference for Melbourne. So and now that I've lived in Melbourne the past 20 years, I sort of can't tell about my story in Melbourne without Carlton almost being front and centre.
Well, I come from a little country town named Murbury North, and our home team was called the Blues. So naturally, we followed the Blues, and Dad used to turn the wireless on for us to listen to the wireless, and we'd always listen when Carlton was on. And I was only 15 at the time in 1938 when Brighton Diggins was captain and they won the premiership. And I remembered it because I thought it was a funny name for anybody to have, Brighton, because I thought, oh, that's a suburb of Melbourne, I think, Anyway, as I say, it just stayed in my memory. I just walked up on my own to the gate and walked through, and I went up to the ticket box, got my ticket, walked through the gates and walked in, and there was nobody much around at that stage. And I sat down on the form that was right round the ground, and I waited for the teams to come out, and it was a good day. And anyway, out they came, and because you get all hot and bothered, when you see them come out. And I had my eye on Ken Hands, of course, and he went up into the forward line, and the ball was bounced in the middle. Well, no sooner had they ball bounced, they started. It never stopped for the whole entire game. They were just one blew after another. But you have to remember that in those days, each team had people, that were on the rough side. In fact, they'd make the ones nowadays look like pussycats. And we had Bob Chitty, of course, and if you got in his way, well, too bad, and Arthur Sanger, and of course they had Basher Williams and different ones like that. And it was the same everywhere. Well, it was just a very, very tough game, and they just never stopped for the whole time. And then, well, I just happened to be sitting there and looking up at Ken Hands, and all of a sudden the player on him went bang, and down he went, and I just felt sick. I thought, oh, what's happened to him, And he went off, and he did come back later on, which was very foolish, but we didn't know any different in those days. But the fighting never stopped from when it started until it finished. But that was the way football was in those days, but that was just even worse than normal. But they used to stand toe to toe and fight, and with only one umpire, it made it very difficult to control all the fighting. Well, it's been something that you've got to cling to, and something to, I don't know, it's just born in you, I think, that you follow something like that. I think the players and everything that attached to it, it just gives you a lift.
We lived in New Zealand. My wife was a New Zealander, and we married in New Zealand, and I brought her back in 1967. And the first game that I took her to see was Carlton versus North Melbourne at Arden Street, and she got a crush on Alex Jesaulenko. So that was basically how we first started. So I was with our family. We had our 3 boys, my wife Michelle, and we were sitting right at the top of the southern stand. And I think that probably before the football, I might just dwell on how we got the finals tickets. And in those days, of course, we had to queue for tickets. Members had to queue for tickets, and we put out our box about 6 weeks before the tickets were sold, came up and camped out, and I came up and got those tickets for that grand final. It was our first grand final. It was a golf fest, It was really a goal fest, and the way the ball was just kicked out from the back line, it just seemed to find players and they just ran through and kicked goals. That was the way it was. Nichols, of course, he was a master plan. He took himself and put himself in the forward pocket and rucked Jones, number 28. Percy Jones, probably one of the greatest games Jonesy ever played. He had the whole of the first half, he rucked all day just about. He couldn't run in the end. I mean, his legs were like lumps of lead, but John Nichols put himself in the forward pocket, of course, and they just bounced off him. He was such a big guy, and you know, it was a masterstroke. For goal scoring and dominance, it would be, except for Richmond made a run at them in the last quarter, I'd say that will be the most biggest game for scoring, but I've seen some great home and away games here over the years. It was the players themselves, you know, and I think that the interaction in those days, there was a lot more interaction with the players on the ground. I mean, our kids used to jump the fence after the game and go up and grab the players, and they'd just about run up the race with them, you know. I think being able to get on the ground and interact with the players and run off with them, that was what moulded, I think, the spectators and the supporters to the club.
I think the moment I started supporting Carlton was the day I was born. That we, given Mum's proclivity for the Blues, I don't think there was any doubt. My father was an Essendon supporter, so he was the black sheep of the family and dabbled in petty crime as far as I'm concerned. The game itself was just this incredibly high quality game, and at the same time you had Hawthorn playing down at Geelong, you had Footscray playing Melbourne, and all this sort of stuff was who was going to, and the key for us was the fight between us and Hawthorn as to who was going to win top spot and get the week's break. So the last quarter started off, and we just seemed to have the game under control, you know. And every time we needed him, every time we needed sticks, there he was. I think we led by about, I'm not sure, 8 points or 10 points. And then the Cracker brothers, just out of nowhere, kicked 2 goals. And then we looked up at the scoreboard for the other thing, and Hawthorn were in front, having come from 35 points down. So talk about hearts thumping, because we knew it was so late in the game. We thought, generally I thought time's gone, you know. The ball bounced, Harry Madden took a mark or something, the ball just bounced. And Harry put in one of his beautiful mongrel punts, fortunately, magnificently, sticks with, it seemed to me, about 6 blokes hanging off him, took the mark. I think in recollection now, having watched the replay, I think there were 3, but you know, he took one of your typical Kernahan chest marks. And then the siren went, you know, and this is it. I mean, to me, this is do we win the flag or not? And boy, talk about the ultimate responsibility on a captain. And he went back, and the ball came off the boot, and I was slightly obscured by the goalpost. But then I noticed sort of people who were in a better position to see me started to go up, and then I could see the ball, and he kicked it well. It wasn't a helicopter. It was a very good drop punt from what I remember. And I could see people, you know, who had a better view started to go up, and I think, oh my God, he's done it. It's kicked it, and it's sailed through. Well, you can imagine the pandemonium. 45,000 suddenly sounded like 80,000. Not only the beauty of that, but we knocked Hawthorn off top spot, and I think that kick put us on the way to winning the '87 flag. I can see it now in my mind. It still remains one of the all-time great memories of supporting Carlton and of what it meant to have Stephen Kernahan at this club. It justified him being made captain, and yes, this bloke is an absolute champion and is going to go on to be a legend of the club. The Carlton Footy Club has meant to me to be a part of really something special. I have a saying, cut me and I bleed blue, navy blue, and it's that ingrained in me.
We came here every Saturday that Carlton played a home game. We used to go to away games, except my dad was always reluctant to go to Footscray or Hawthorn because it was a long way from Preston. You forget that how much people lived in their own communities at that time. So every weekend it was to Carlton at Princes Park on the Saturday, to the Preston Football Club on a Sunday afternoon, and that was, was a big part of our life. So I recall we were sitting in the southern stand on the half-forward flank on the lower level of the southern stand, and at that time, because of the ground and the lack of stands, the ground, the wind used to swirl around, so it became very difficult. It was a very windy day. Well, that's what I recall. I don't know how windy it was, but I do recall it was a very, very windy day, and Carlton kicked inaccurately. And at half-time, we were feeling kind of reasonably confident because we'd had a good second quarter, an even first quarter, good second quarter. And by the time the third quarter came, Carlton had, Essendon caught up a little bit, and they weren't far behind, probably only a few points behind it at three-quarter time. And that last quarter, if I recall correctly, Carlton was kicking towards the Jolimont end, I think, that day, at that time, and just sitting there thinking, why can't they kick a goal? Because they didn't kick a goal in the last quarter. And in fact, I'm not even sure. I know that Carlton kicked less goals than Essendon, and I'm not sure if that's a record, that the grand final winning team has actually kicked less goals than the opposition. So, I mean, afterwards we were incredibly excited, obviously, to win the grand final, but also it wasn't the game that we really wanted it to be. The game that we wanted it to be was the game that we played in the second semi-final, when we played very good slick football. But the grand final game itself isn't a particularly good game to watch. The result's great, but it wasn't one of those masterclasses of Australian football. At 68, it was not just that we'd waited a long time, but we'd seen now 4 years of growth in the club, and the social club was built and all of the other things. So it was a defining moment for a lot of supporters at that time, and 21 years seemed a long time. And I suppose the other part of it was that the 21 years went back to the war, and the war also is a defining moment, in history. And a lot of things we often talk about pre-war, post-war, and I think that was another kind of element. Carlton didn't have a premiership apart from 47. All of their premierships were kind of pre-war, and that was kind of an interesting, as I reflect on it, an interesting kind of issue, for us at 68. It's been an important part of my family. My own kids, my nieces and nephews. We still go to the football together as family, so it's a connection that way. We catch up at the footy, we'll catch up and have a drink after the footy, before the footy. It's still, I still identify with the club. I identify as a young boy with I've still got my first footy jumper, and one of my son's got his first football jumper. We keep those kinds of, the memorabilia. I've got my WEG poster from 68, for example. So all of those build up a history in you, which is part of your life.
It was really just yeah, Dad loved the club, and he would escape on a Saturday afternoon or evening or whatever the case may be to come and watch us, and I wanted to do it as well, and been doing it now for 20 years. We were sitting behind the goals at the Legend stand then, and we were sort of not caged in, but we were sort of blocked in a bit. We couldn't really go anywhere, so we all stood up as most people did who remained where they were, and saw the sort of fanfare at the end of the game unfold. Unfortunately for us, it was at the other side of the park, I suppose, but you could obviously see what was going on and whatnot. Yeah, it was a really weird feeling, sort of unlike anything at any game I've ever felt. You know, it was sort of, everyone was sort of pretty deflated and emotionally exhausted, and but at the same time, it was sort of quite rare for everybody to still be where they were and still, you know, obviously in the ground. We probably, I think I was sort of 17 at the time. You probably take for granted, like as I said, everyone was sort of overcome with the sense that this is the last time, but you probably take for granted that until you're removed from it, and you obviously haven't played here for a number of years, and yeah, absolutely, that was it. That was the last time that we would play for points or anything meaningful at, you know, what had been our home for 110 odd years, which was, as I said, yeah, you probably remove yourself from it now and sort of still get quite emotional, maybe more emotional than at the time. Princes Park, more than perhaps any other ground, everything was about a routine, and I'm sure it was the same for everyone else. I mean, we parked in the same spot. We'd park just off Royal Parade next to the Parkfield Tennis Club, and the same cars were there every week, and if you didn't get there early enough, you missed out and you had to try and find somewhere else to park. And that was the same spot. We had Last Chance Car Park, which was down by the zoo if you didn't get a spot there, and if there was no spots there, you were in strife, and then you'd walk up and we'd enter at gate 2, you'd come down off Royal Parade, and obviously people would get the number 19 tram, and you'd walk into the ground and you'd stand where you stood every week, and every week around you were the same people. And I remember there was this gentleman with a young family, and his kids are probably 20 odd now, and they were always sitting in the same spot. And everything about it was, yeah, it was just, if you're going to the game at Princes Park, this is what you do. And you're doing it with Dad, you know, every week, and it still is. It's fantastic. I think if you boil it down and note it down, it's just without Dad, like I wouldn't follow the Blues, and it's just, yeah, that's what it's all about for us. That's what we do together, and we do it every week and continue to do it every week, and talk about it every day. You know, who's in, who's out, what's going on. And for me, obviously, the club's really important, the players and the people, but yeah, it's probably just Dad, to be perfectly honest.
I was only a kid then, and every Tuesday and Thursday night I would be religiously at Carlton for the training, and I'd make sure that when the KG Leak ute arrived from KG Leak Industries, and where half the Carlton players worked, and Bob Chitty would get off the truck and I'd grab his bag and I'd carry his bag to the room into the ground. And I had an autograph book at the time. I had some great autographs of George Formby, Tommy Trinder, and Marco Marks, Harpo Marks. And I must have had Bob Chitty's about 20 times in the book. Whatever happened to that autograph book, I don't know. I do recall it was against Geelong, and on that particular day, for some reason or other, I was in the outer. So I had my face looking down towards the Robert Heatley stand, and as I recall, the Suster went up for this mark. I'm not sure whose shoulders he was on, but I got an idea McClure was somewhere in the vicinity. And as he twisted in the air and ended up taking the mark on his chest, obviously with his knees or legs on someone's shoulders, either Geelong or a Carlton player, but he twisted as he took the mark, and it was quite a spectacular mark, and one of the best you would see. Each year you'll get one that'll be put in the same class. The Smith of Melbourne, his mark was probably equally as good, but it was one of the best marks you'd see. He was only a short time at Carlton, but he probably wasn't here more than 3 years, I think, 3 or 4 years. But he certainly made his presence felt while he was here. Well, Carlton has meant a great deal to me. As a kid, a club like Carlton was something to look up to. You didn't go just for football. You admired the players that played for the club. You admired the jumper. And you admired going there every Thursday night. It was something to look forward to.
My father played for Carlton Seconds back in the 40s. My mother was also born and raised in Coburg. So even though we lived in Caulfield, we took the Carlton with us. Well, I was actually in Sydney and it was even news in Sydney, and in those days that was unheard of. I really couldn't believe it. The first time I think a superstar has actually moved from another club to another team, and really I didn't know how to feel at the time, but he certainly won us over. At this particular ground one day, because he actually burst out of the pack and kicked a goal, and he had that famous grimace that he used to have when he didn't have his teeth in. And I think everybody then realised that he was actually playing as a Carlton player, not as an ex-Melbourne. It was probably the start for the whole league of players changing and coaching other teams, etc, etc. Because I know at Carlton we used to have, our coaches were ex-Carlton, because Ken Hands and so forth, etc. But Ron Barassi was just one in a million, I think. We'd been a middle-of-the-road club, I suppose, so we had a lot of good players, but we needed someone to give them a bit of grunt, I think. So, and Barassi certainly inspired lots of players. It was a start of a really wonderful period of time for Carlton, and it'd be nice to get back to that. Carlton gives me a lot of joy, especially with our wonderful teams. And a lot of heartaches too, but and camaraderie. Like, met a lot of good people at the football, and the only problem is now our group has died away and they're getting smaller and smaller. So, but my daughter, I started her going when she was 3, and she's still going, and she's 46 now.
I didn't really become a Carlton supporter. I think I was more born one. I was watching footy games at home before I can even remember. And I remember when I was very young, Carlton lost a game, and I think it was against Port Adelaide, and I decided that I wanted to go for Port Adelaide, and I got a poster and put it in my room, and the next day I came home and it was gone. And my dad said, if you want to barrack for anyone else but Carlton, that's fine, but you can't live here. You're going to have to find somewhere else to live. So, no, I wasn't forced. I was always born blue, I guess, and yeah, my love for them has just prospered since then. I haven't known anything else. I couldn't know anything else. There was so much talk about where he was going to go. He decided he was going to come home, and I think it was either Melbourne, who he barracked for as a kid, Collingwood, Essendon, or Carlton. And I remember watching the footy show every Thursday night. They showed a vision of him visiting every club, and I just thought it was too good to be true if he came to Carlton. But I remember it clearly actually. I was in a movie, and I got a text from my dad, and it just said, "See Judd to Blues." And I think I actually had to walk out of the movie and call him, and I just couldn't believe it. And it was honestly one of the best days of my life, I think, because he was the best player in the competition, but so far it didn't matter. And he decided that he wanted to come home, and he was going to be playing for Carlton. I remember one of my mates, Dan, actually told me that he started hating me that day, that Carlton got Chris Judd, because it just made me an intolerable person. He brought a brand to the club. He brought a sense of unstoppability for want of a better word. He was just not only such a good player and already a Brownlow medalist and a premiership captain at that stage, but he was something else. The way he broke packs, the way he had that 10 metres of speed, the fact that he wasn't arrogant and wasn't a larrikin, he just oozed class. And I think he's brought that to Carlton. We've always been a side with a bit of a swagger, particularly when we're going well, but he brought that sense of class. But I go back to that sense of being a brand. I mean, I'd love to know the figure of how many Carlton Guernseys with number 5 on the back were sold since he's been here. It'd be in the thousands, if not tens of thousands, I would have thought. But for him to move from West Coast over to Carlton, I can't remember a player having a bigger impact on the club that he moved to. I guess Carlton is just, it's part of me, is the way I sort of talk about it. I mean, coming up to being a journalist and having to cover games objectively is quite difficult with loving Carlton so much. It's something odd that you have to get used to, but I think it's a cult. It's a special part of you that you can't get rid of, from the frustrations of losing and driving home without a radio on to indulging in every victory like it's the last you'll ever make. It's something special, and every club has something special about it, and you're always going to be biased to the one you support, but there's something about this place that still sends shivers up my spine, and it will continue, I think, for the rest of my life, because it's, as I said, it's what I've grown up with.
Few records exist of Carlton's first competitive matches in 1864. It was an inauspicious beginning for what would later become the greatest of all Australian football institutions. On a cool autumn evening 150 years ago, the gentlemen of the local district convened at the University Hotel on Lygon Street to formally establish the Carlton Football Club.
I wasn't brought up in a footy household. My parents weren't into football at all, but everyone at school had footy jumpers. I felt left out. I told Mum, can you go and get me a footy jumper, please? She went to Myers, and we're talking mid-60s here, so commercialisation wasn't what it is today. Mum looked on the racks, saw, oh, dark blue, that's practical colour. He can go out and get muddy, and no, I don't have to wash the jumper. I'll get him that one. And she handed the lady the jumper, and the woman reached under the counter and pulled out this white emblem. Mum said, what's that? And said, you have to sew it on the front. Mum said, oh, okay. Mum had no idea what it was. She sewed it on back to front. It looked great in the mirror, but she didn't know what the CFC stood for. I took it to school, and I didn't know, I wasn't any the wiser either. And I was laughed off the footy field at playtime. Everyone said, what's that? Anyway, from that day, I've been a Carlton supporter, and nothing's changed. It's been just True Blue ever since. I often think of premierships like children. You love them all. You know, there's no one better than any other one. But 82 is right up there. You know, it was, in some ways, I think about it as a high watermark for athleticism. The game was still all about contested football in those days. But 82 had also an edge to it. There was a bit of a nasty edge to it. It was brutal, it was physical, and that probably stemmed from the way the game started. The Blues got off to a flyer. Richmond decided to go the knuckle. They started up a couple of rolling mauls, you know, about the 10-minute mark of the first quarter, and that set the tone for the whole day. But I think the Blues' versatility was a huge factor in that third quarter. Ross Ditchburn had been KO'd in the first quarter. Parkin moved McClure to full forward. He put Fitzpatrick at centre-half forward, and Warren Jones rucked that whole third quarter. Fitzpatrick kicked 2 goals, McClure kicked 1. And those That was 3 of our 5 goals. Critical in helping the Blues steal a march. I just remember her being escorted off. There was not a great deal of fuss. It was a curiosity, you know, it was something I don't think we'd seen on that sort of stage before. One of my favourite moments is kick out from Shane Williams out to the half-back flank. Emmett Dunn had the sit, Mark McClure spoiled, shoveled the ball forward. Alex Marcoux came in, picked the ball up in one forward motion in his right hand and picked the ball straight through the middle, and that was the sealer. We won 2 years running, but we'd also won in '79, and I think off the top of my head there'd probably be 8 or 9 changes from '81 to '79. Sure, they had plenty of experience and plenty of grand final and premiership experience, but they had the backup too, and it was a great squad and a great team and a great list. It's impossible to overstate what Carlton means to someone like me who grew up supporting the side, who never missed a game for virtually my entire teenage years. You barrack for them, defend them in the schoolyard and over a beer with friends. You justify the bad times, you celebrate the good times. You really feel like you're part of the place, even though it's from the wrong side of the fence. I would have loved to have played just one game. That would have been great. Club's been fantastic, always will be. Nothing's going to change in that respect.
I was born a Carlton supporter. Our family's very Navy, and regardless that I would have had no choice about who I was going to vote for, I was very lucky to be born in an era of fantastic instant success for me. So within my first 5 years, we had won 3 premierships, so there was no doubt who I was going to vote for, and that legacy lives on because my kids, whether this sounds crude or not, I'm sorry, came out of the womb singing the song. And we are very much a Carlton family. And the fantastic part about football to me was that it gave me a lovely bond with my father, because it was the time of the week where it was just my dad and I, and would come and sit in the Healy stand and watch the game, and would get here early and watch the twos and talk about the game afterwards, and it was special with my old man. My most vivid memories of that day start in the morning. I remember waking up and being too nervous to eat breakfast, and we had some friends down from Cairns that came, big Carlton supporters that came to watch the game, and we met up in the morning and everyone spoke matchups, etc., and we walked through Fitzroy Gardens to be able to get to the MCG, and then we all split up because we had sort of different seats. And I sat with a very close friend, and I remember, I guess, this nervousness, and it was more of an anxiety because of probably the couple of years before in final series. But I also remember being supremely confident because of the fantastic year that we had had. And I think after kicking the first 4 goals of the game, I think that I was able to relax and enjoy it a little bit, and I did. I think Greg Williams' goal, when he sort of picked it up, and then I think he kicked it left foot in the pocket, and then ran back and sort of, oh no, I think it was pulled to ground, and then he hit somebody's hand off and then went in high 5-6. I believe that was my favourite moment. But I don't know, I think El Spalding's smother in the second quarter, the first goal in the second quarter, I think was fantastic. I think he also handballed it to Harry Madden, and Harry came in and kicked the goal, and that's where I was sitting. I was sitting in the Pomfret stand, and that ball flew basically over my head, so I remember that quite vividly. But there's a few. After the siren and watching the lap of honour, I met up with my dad and a few other friends outside the front of the Hilton, and someone had bought a 6-pack of beer and we all had a bit of a share, and my brother was only 10 or 11 years old but he had his first beer. And we walked, we call it the Premiership Walk, and we walked back through Fitzroy Gardens and walked all the way back into Carlton, and then realised that we were going to be late for the function. So quickly got home, put our suits on and went to the official function for afterwards, which was just one of the best nights that I can remember that I've ever had. Carlton means everything to me. Carlton, I live in Carlton, I was born in Carlton, my parents were both born in Carlton, they have businesses in Carlton, I have business in Carlton, all my family lives in Carlton. We are as Carlton as you can get. The football club represents the suburb, and we are involved in the suburb and as the football club as much as we can be. And everyone that wears that jumper I've loved.
To be honest, I can't really remember because it's just always been part of my life, and it's probably the biggest part of my life really, the Blues. They certainly dictate whether I'm having a good week or a bad week. It's yeah, certainly something that means a lot to me. Yep, I remember we sat somewhere a little differently, I'm not sure why, probably because it was hard to get tickets, but we were on the forward pocket at the Punt Road end. I was with my dad, who I always went to the footy with. He's probably the only bloke I know who's a bigger Carlton supporter than me, and we sat there, and I remember going into the game thinking it was a really tough ask, the Bombers. They were clearly the standout team, and I don't think anyone really expected us to go all the way that year, but you know, Carlton-Essendon games of course can often write their own script, and that one certainly did. We burst out of the blocks and they came again, and probably when people thought we were going to lie down, we didn't, and that last quarter was, you know, history, and it's no surprise that it's been chosen as one of Carlton's greatest ever moments. You know, there's always little pockets that stay in your memory, and I just remember I was 13 years old and I knew nothing about sort of betting or favourites or anything like that, and I remember saying to my dad at 3/4 time, I said, you know, what do you reckon? He said, oh, I reckon the bookies would have us about even money. I'm like, really? Really? We're doing so well. This is the best footy we've played in ages. And, you know, to good form, you know, they hit the front, and at a stage there, it you know, looked like the Bombers were going to, you know, flex their muscle that they had all year. But, you know, enter Kuda, and, you know, Kuda that day I think showed why he's every bit, you know, as good a player as anyone that's ever played the game. He tore the heart out of the Bombers. Again, he probably would have taken 9 or 10 marks in that last quarter. They probably didn't give him the respect he deserved, and him and a couple of others were, you know, responsible for pulling off the great win. It couldn't have been scripted any better, really. I mean, which Carlton supporter doesn't hate Dean Wallace? So Barry Young kicked the ball in, and you know, Lloydie had been Lloydie all day. No one took the mark, and Dean Rice has just basically thrown the ball on the boot and mongrel kick, and it's gone straight to Dean Wallace. And then Fraser Brown, the junkyard dog, just bang, bone-crunching tackle. Who was it? Justin Murphy's come through, grabbed the ball, run right through the guts, and then it was ours. It's fantastic. It was amazing. I remember Dad and I, like Dad's seen a lot more Carlton success than me. I think he's seen, you know, 8 or 9 premierships, but just the joy. I think a couple of weeks beforehand we'd lost to the Bombers, and we'd sat behind this really obnoxious Essendon supporter, and we were saying, let's go find him, this is great. Here I am, a 14-year-old kid, you know, it was just, oh look, you know, it brought out a wild side. It was, you know, by far the best Carlton moment I can remember, and still is. It was made all so much better by the fact that it was Essendon. I mean, who doesn't love beating Essendon? Carlton means everything to me, and I'm sure it always will. You know, I come down here to watch training, I go to all the games. I'm so happy being in this building. You know, like I said before, you know, Carlton dictates whether I'm having a good week or a bad week. Yeah, I love the Blues. I bleed blue blood.
Well, I recall as a very young boy, early 60s, my brother Tim, who is well known to you, he came to me and said, you know, what is it? Is it Carlton or is it Collingwood? Carlton's dad, Collingwood's mum. And look, I might have been a bit of a bandwagon supporter because it was around about 62. It was 61, 62. But they were just great times for a young kid growing up in Tasmania. 68, I was 12. 70, I was 14. 72, I was 16. I can plot my life on those great times. I remember a couple of days before the game, Tommy was talking up the poor weather. Tommy wanted a glue pot. Tommy wanted a quagmire. And you know, we had a very skilled team. We had the Mosquito Fleet, we had Sheldon, we had Buckley, we had Harms, Michael Young, very proud of Michael Young, the Tasmanian. And if anything was going to impact or negate us, it was the mud and the slush. And I was worried about that going into the game. I think it was sort of nip and tuck all the way through, but they were cobbling goals together and we weren't. And it got to late in the second quarter and they had about a 5-goal lead and we were in strife. We were in big strife. And I think that's about the time that Alexander the Great made the master stroke move. Harms went onto the ball or into the middle. I think Marcoux came on as well, and I think Marcoux gave us a bit of dash as well. And you know, it was Buckley and Sheldon who started to find the ball around goal, and we snapped a few. And I think by half time we might have, it was a line ball game. We might have had our noses in front.
Buckley gets it out to Harms now. He's pursued by Brewer, but he can't catch him. Harms fires at the goals, but he's off target. It's rolling towards the boundary line, and Harms almost makes ground. He tips it back to Sheldon. It's a goal! Oh, what a goal! If you don't mind.
Look, I was in such a state of excitement, and I was just all about winning. You know, we just had to win, and I think, and you know, you can hear my recall of the game, and I have done a little bit more reading, but I think when it all happened, you know, Harmsy had the ball and drove it forward, and I, you know, had a perfect view, and he just did what he had to do. He had to get to the ball, and I don't think it sort of played on my mind that the ball might have been in the Hilton Hotel, that he might have been, you know, in the top bar at the Hilton Hotel and knocked the ball back. I don't think that actually went through my mind, but and I think it was probably seeing it later on and seeing it replayed, you know, tens of thousands of times that I've, you know, realised what an amazing moment it was. Oh, look, Carlton's been a big part of my life. I plot my life according to the success of the Carlton Football Club, but it can get me into a little bit of trouble at home when, you know, I talk about, you know, where I was in 68, where I was in 72 and 79, and you know, my wife just said to me the other day, you know, where was I? I remember too much stuff according to how Carlton was going, and you know, what was, I somehow seemed to be able to link my life with what was going on at Carlton.
I was taken to the football by my uncles who were Collingwood. My grandfather was Fitzroy. My father was Carlton. But my father didn't go to the football much in those days. He was working as an SP, would you believe, up a lane somewhere in Fitzroy. And so I didn't have any illusions until later on, and when I was a little bit older in my childhood, and then we went to the football, and Carlton it was. And Carlton it's been ever since. A lot of memories, a lot of pride in the club. It's like a second home. It's like family. Jezza was well out of his position. He was probably up around about the centre wing, and well, he just took off actually. He just ran for the mark and he just leapt with one leap, and he just leapt over the top of the side, almost stood on his shoulders with his knees, and he took that mark basically chest high. And yeah, there was an almighty roar because, well, who the hell was that? To us Carlton supporters, we knew who it was Jez Alenko.
Was a trip,
yes. I didn't think he was going to play it, Mike. He was spot on.
Okay, to the wing position on the member stand side. Oh, Jez Alenko, you beauty!
Jez is a lovely fellow, and one of the best three I've seen play for Carlton, and yes, it'll always linger with me, and I think it'll always linger with every Carlton supporter that was there that day. It just won't leave their minds. When they go back to that grand final, the day that as it turned out, we were down. Whether that mark sparked us or not, I can't say. I doubt whether it did, but it was an astonishing mark, and it was capped off by a win from an impossible position. Football, as long as I'm capable, as long as my legs can take me, as long as my health is good, I'll be there to watch them, win, lose or otherwise. And yes, that bad time during the early 2000s, look around and where is everyone? Yeah, you know, a lot of them felt away and wouldn't come, but no, you have to be there, you have to still give them that support, and that's what support's about, the good times and the bad times, and so that's the way it is with me. I'll be there until I can't be there, so that's about it.
My brother was a Carlton supporter. My brother was 10 years older than me, and he used to go to the footy with his cousins, and our cousins lived in Coburg. We lived in Pascoe Vale. Most of the people were Essendon. They were pretty successful about, you know, 50s and 60s. And he used to go to Carlton, and I used to be intrigued and wanted to tag along, and I didn't get to go until I was probably about 10 or 11 when he took me under sufferance. But that was when I first came to Princes Park, and I was hooked. There was a lot of sort of, probably the personal aspect of who I was with and our family at the time, and that sort of has a special place in my memory, because I went with my brother, who's since passed away. He passed away in '82. So that, you know, being there with him, remembering the day, remembering the feeling at half time, which was pretty grim, and it was, yeah, just everything about it sort of has memories, because I saw it from the top of the Ponsford stand, and that's where the Carlton people were, and I think other than Jez's mark, which I do remember, but I remember it from the back, because I was in the stand and you could see this 25 rise to the heavens. I think I was on the top deck. I've always told Alison, you know, my children, you know, I was looking up, he was so high. And he took the mark, and that was probably the only glimmer that we sort of made a peep for the first half. And I was sitting there, and you could hear the Collingwood people in the southern stand singing, which really didn't go down very well. You didn't get a lot of information because you only had to watch the game, you know, and all we remember was that he came out and there was this little blonde guy down in the forward pocket. All of a sudden he's grabbed the ball and snapped the goal, and we've said, oh, that's all right, you know, and I think that he kicked a couple more and it got even louder. And it was really quite funny because at half time, when we'd been so gloomy, I said, look, oh, come on guys, you know, it's going to be fine. We're going to come out and kick 6 in the third quarter. Well, we kicked about 8, so it was looking pretty good. So the balls, you know, everybody's running everywhere, everybody's screaming and yelling, and it was loud. It was so loud, and there were floggers and mess and everything was going on, and the crowd was going nuts. Jezza had grabbed the ball in between a sea of Collingwood players and kicked the way he kicked with that sort of throw it on the boot. And the ball's bouncing and bouncing, and the crowd standing and kneeling.
It's bounced through!
You wouldn't believe this, honestly. That's Cesarenko's third goal, and Collingwood players holding hands to their head as the time's getting away from them now.
Oh, I think it'd have to be right up there because of, well, A, the occasion. I mean, we've won, you know, I've been privileged to win, we've won some terrific flags, but that's the one that stands out. You know, if you can, it sounds a bit arrogant, doesn't it? You've got some flags that are better than others. There's a few clubs that did like that sort of thought. But I think it'd have to be up there, just because of the occasion, the opposition, where we were, what we overcame to get there, and yeah, it was stunning, absolutely stunning. It's an emotional attachment. It's, you know, family, memories, all those, you know, those wonderful players over time. It's Princes Park. I always think of this place. It's, you know, the spiritual home of the Blues. It always will be.